Good evening, everyone. Adab from Lucknow. A very warm welcome to all of you to the ninth session of Military Literature Festival Lucknow, which is being organized by Military Literature and Cultural Festival Foundation. A special welcome to our esteemed guests, Sanjay Kapoor, Ajai Shukla, and Abhijit Dasgupta. They join us from New Delhi, Nilgiris, and Kolkata. They are seasoned journalists of repute and expert in their own fields. A war has many facets. One of the important one is war reporting. Reporting from the war zone has its own risks, but one gets to know the truth better. War correspondents have a special romantic image attached to them. They have been there and they have seen it all. We still remember in our young days in Lucknow when Mr. Vanshu had covered the 1971 war, came back, and they were Mr. Silvano, who's present today. Uh, they would be telling the stories at the India Coffee House or in the evening parties, and they would all be wearing the coat parkas which were given to them. They came to be known as the coat parka journalists. But उनकी कहानी सुन के लोगों के रोंगटे खड़े हो जाते थे. So I'm sure today's session will also be equally interesting. Today we'll hear from Ajay Shukla about his experiences in Afghanistan 2001, Iraq, and Lebanon. And Abhijit will take us to East Pakistan, Bangladesh, March 1971 onwards. He was reported as the youngest war correspondent. Today's session is dedicated to Deepak Banerjee and a few more journalists, one from India and many from Bangladesh, who lost their lives in 1971 war. In fact, the Bangladesh government is going to be announcing an award for Deepak Banerjee. So session is dedicated to them and all those who had covered that war and otherwise who are war correspondents. After we talk to Ajay Shukla, there would be a brief interlude wherein I'll chip in with a few words on Anthony Mascarenhas' story. And towards the end, we will touch upon the changing role of war correspondents. Moderating the session today, we have seasoned journalist Sanjay Kapoor, who is well known. He is the founder and editor of Hard News. Earlier, he was the editor of the Delhi edition of Midday and bureau chief of Blitz. Sanjay's work on Jain Diaries Hawala Scam and his book Bad Money and Bad Politics are well known. He is a sought after speaker and also specializes in the international affairs. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you so much for reconnecting me to Lucknow. I'm a Lucknow wala. So when I got to know that there is a literature festival being put together from the standpoint of the army, I was very happy, although Lucknow is seen to be a city where people are laid back, has got very little to do with armed forces, although the first war of independence was fought in 1857 in Delhi. But I think since then, a lot of water has moved in Gomti. And surely it is a great thing that this festival is being conceived by General H.K. Singh and managed to get everybody together. And war is an issue which I think needs a great amount of deliberation during peacetime. And we need to figure out the course of how it is being reported, what has been reported, and what is not being reported. We are taking up the issue of war correspondence. I mean, this is a topic of this panel discussion where I have very eminent panelists. We have Ajay Shukla, who has been, going like a soldier in journalism, media, totally displaying courage and writing fearlessly on issues that people would shy from. And there is Sir Abhijit Dasgupta, who at the very tender age of 21 went to East Pakistan to report on the Bangladesh war. And when he went in the age of 21, he already has 7 years of experience behind him. So you can just imagine he was straight from kindergarten into journalism. I'm sure he'll tell more about that later. So coming back to the issue of war correspondent, at a time when media is being trashed because of the rise in populism and generally people are questioning what they do, I think it's important that we talk about how journalists display raw courage in reporting war, which is the most, it's an event in our lives. It's happening in our life, which strains every core of our knowledge, our understanding, and brings to the fore the courage people have. Journalists are normally seen to be those people who are entering a building which is burning when everybody is leaving that place. So that is what we want to talk about. Uh, we have seen high number of casualties of war correspondent. Most recently, a photojournalist Danish Hussain died in Spin Boldak in Afghanistan, and he was one of those who captured the very ethos of photojournalism, which says that if you haven't got a good picture, it means you're not close enough. So these photojournalists, defying every possible, you can say, circumstances, the fear that stares at them, they end up reconciling to it. They go very close to it. Now they have large, huge telelenses, but at the time of Abhijit Dasgupta, when he was in Bangladesh, they had very limited resources. So you had people like Danish Hussain becoming a casualty, and there are many, many more. I saw some action also in Syria when I went there in 2011, 12. It's also in Kashmir during the time of conflict in the early days, but nothing like the experience that Ajay Shukla probably saw when he covered uh, the Kargil War in 1979 as a soldier. Then subsequently, he saw action in post 2001 in Afghanistan, and then Iraq and Lebanon. So we are very privileged to have him here, and we want first question to be answered, which he can take his time to do that, is why did he leave the army to join journalism? Was army wasn't exciting enough? Ajay?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. This very sort of illustrious military literature festival. It's a special privilege for me because I'm a Lucknow wala myself. I'm from old Lucknow, Golaganj. Many of the listeners, I'm sure, would be familiar with that. But pleasure to be here, absolute pleasure, and forward to the interaction at the end of the talk. But coming straight to Sanjay's question about why I left the army, well, I stayed on until I had finished command of my regiment. And it was an armored regiment, a sort of regiment called Hodson's Horse. When you finish command of your regiment and look ahead at what lies before you, it's not a very exciting landscape compared to what you've been through. Command of whether a squadron or a regiment or any other thing, and where you have men directly under you and under your command for a combat role, is something which is the last word in soldiering. So I had only sort of desk jobs or maybe command of a brigade if I was lucky ahead of me, and I said no. Let me sort of stay with on ground activities and on ground work. And I have to say, I really picked exactly the right job because with journalism, you're right there where the action is. You're in touch with people. You're very much sort of on the ground, and you get a chance to, by virtue of being a journalist, a defense journalist, I've stayed in touch with the military to an extent which I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Sanjay?
I have a question. During my earlier conversation with you, you said that you were very, very unsatisfied with the way Indian media reported army and how it went about it. And I had shared my own experience with you that most of all, you have journalists who are actually um, accompany the army, and they end up reporting precisely what the army wants them to do. There is no departure from the stated, purpose for which they are taken. So how did you expect to change when you joined them? When did the penny drop that you need to leave the army and go into reporting so that you can make a difference?
Well, I would say that it went as far back as the Kargil War. I know that the Kargil War is regarded by many journalists as the high spot of their career, and I absolutely don't want to disrespect that experience. but the actual reporting itself, and I was in J&K at that time, I was actively involved in the war. I have to say that it was being done with, let me say, a knowledge deficit. Most of the people who were reporting at that time were new to the job. Defense journalism was not a field as it exists in this country. So they were sort of very gung-ho youngsters who were all told, okay, go and report this war. And they went there and they did the very best that they could have. But the truth is that they were not familiar and not in touch with the nitty gritties of how a war is fought, what the aspects are. And from then till now, things have changed a great deal. The defense journalists that you have in this country today, many of them are extremely knowledgeable, and they have built up that knowledge over sort of 2 decades since Kargil. So today you have a very illustrious field. But at that time, I have to say, they didn't know very much. And I went to NDTV, and when I had come to Delhi, and I said that, you'd better change your sort of approach to defense journalism. You need to have qualified defense journalists. You need to have people with experience on the ground. And that was sort of what I offered in my second career. It was as a journalist who didn't know much about journalism, but knew a fair amount about the military field and about how wars are fought. I had been 22 years in the army at that stage. And now I would say that anybody who enters defense journalism perforce has to build up a bank of experience so that he or she can report knowledgeably.
So Ajay, if I remember right, the first job that you took up was in Afghanistan. I mean, NDTV decided to send you to Afghanistan. That was to year 2001, post the atrocities in New York City, when Bush decided to bomb Afghanistan and to prevent the Taliban from staying any longer. So tell us a little bit about Afghanistan, because we come back in news in a really big way, so it will help people understand a bit about the landscape and how you ended up reporting. How did your military experience help you?
Well, I sort of became a journalist on the 1st of July 2000. And I was still learning the difference between a camera and an edit machine. And sort of what happens in just 2.5 months, less than that, is that the 9/11 attacks take place in New York. And all of us who are from that generation, now, of course, many of the people who are doing journalism were sort of just in their cradles at that time. But people always remember what they were doing when 9/11 happened, what was their first reaction, and what was the moment like. And for me, it was in the newsroom. And when we saw those planes fly into the World Trade Center, many of us were sort of not willing to even believe that this is actually, it was just such an incredible thing. But there I was, a journalist with two months of experience total under his belt. And I went to the editors of NDTV for whom I was working. And I said, it's time to get into Afghanistan right now, because if you don't get in now, the borders will be sealed for one reason or the other, and you won't have a correspondent over there. So there I was. I went along with a colleague of mine, Vishnu Shom, who many people are familiar with. He's a prominent anchor in NDTV even today. And we then started working out our calculations for how to get into Afghanistan, because 95% of the country was under the control of Taliban at that time. And
you went to Dushanbe.
I beg your pardon?
You went to Dushanbe.
Yeah, we went via Tajikistan to cross the famous Oxus River of legend, which Alexander had crossed in his time. And we got into that 5% of Afghanistan, which constitutes the Panjshir Valley. And from there, we started working our way towards Kabul. So it was the biggest story in the world by a big margin at that stage. And anybody who was a journalist of repute, you can name the person as a war correspondent, and he will have been in Afghanistan at some stage or the other. He or she, I should say, because there were many illustrious lady journalists there as well. So that's how it all began. And from then onwards, it was just a question of getting close enough to the action to be able to report.
So tell us more about when the actual takeover happened of the US forces getting into Kabul. How were you along with them, or you followed later? Was there a discrimination between white journalists and Indian journalists? What was it playing out like?
Well, just to answer your sort of question right off the front before I circle back again, it was the one place I can think of where the journalists were ahead of the troops. The first people into Kabul, when it fell on the 13th of November 2001, was the journalists. And the Taliban had, the last elements of the Taliban had pulled out the evening before. And there were only a few who were left behind for one reason or the other. But it was the journalists who went off ahead, while the Northern Alliance forces were sort of on the outskirts of Kabul. And the Americans came in later. They were at that stage in the role of providing fire support through bombing by fighter aircraft that were on board aircraft carriers in the sort of West Asian region, and by sort of long-range bombers, B-52 bombers, who were flying, 3,000-4,000 kilometers to even reach the point where they had to release their bombs. But it was very interesting for me to see the competitiveness of the journalists that were actually there. In the military, you are used to working in close coordination with your team and being very tight and close to them. Whereas in journalists, it's very competitive. Everybody who's a journalist along with you is vying with you for getting the best story and getting the best piece of reporting out. So there are no friends there. There are only competitors. I realized this right when we reached, because one of the people who was with me was from another agency. I will not name any names. Another channel. And I reached the front lines and I said, I reported back over the phone, my first phone report from Afghanistan. This is a relatively stable front line. There's the Taliban and there's the Northern Alliance, and there's very little firing, and they seem to have been in this position for a long time. And when I put the phone down, I got a call from my channel saying, listen, where are you? You seem to be missing the whole story. And they cited the other person over there who, reporting for his channel, had sort of painted a picture of death and devastation, that there's huge amounts of firing and it's a very dangerous place and we are here by the skin of our teeth and so on. So I was told by my channel, you'd better go there where the action is. I said, the person who reported is standing 15 feet from me. So it took me some time to get a sense of, you have to make the story sound good. You have to make the story sound dangerous. You have to make it seem as if you're there at the cost of your life, at the peril of your life. But I'm happy to note that I stuck to simply reporting it as it was. And, I thought it was exciting enough for me.
Coming back to Afghanistan again, I mean, you had a large contingent of journalists from Western media, TV channels, only a few from third world countries like India. What is the kind of gap that you experience in terms of resources, in terms of access they had and everything else? I mean, did you feel at any stage that you were not able to do more than what you could have done if you had better resources?
Yes. In fact, I was the laughing stock of the journalist community over there, because I used to do my own camera work. I used to do my own reporting. I used to do my own edit. I used to do my own uplink. And all of them used to laugh and say, you're going to put us out of business, because they came loaded with equipment. If there was one journalist from the BBC who was facing the camera, there was a team of at least 15 people around them who were doing the other ancillary jobs. not to forget the security aspects of that person's his or her security. So I was very sort of ill-equipped compared to international journalist houses like NBC and BBC and CNN and so on. They were really equipped to do the job. But I had one thing which none of them had, and that was a cultural understanding of Afghanistan. I had the goodwill of all the Afghan people. They just love Indians. They believe all Indians are like Amitabh Bachchan or Shah Rukh Khan, and they see a lot of movies. So wherever I went, I was looked after. I was greeted with joy by the Afghans, and that is not the case with the Western journalists who were there, because for them they were alien people for the locals. So it was a wonderful contrast in many respects, and I have to say that Indians are well looked after in Afghanistan, and thank you Bollywood for that.
So one question I had never actually thought I would ask is that, did Indian government defense ministry have any interest in your reporting when you were there in Afghanistan? Was there any suggestion
I,
that you
I
should see
certainly
that?
think, I certainly think, Sanjay, that they were listening to what I had to say, as were a lot of people at that time. It was really a very big story. So the Ministry of Defense was certainly listening, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the intelligence agencies, I learned later, were also listening, but that's their job. That's
That's
what
a
they,
job, yeah. Because we
uh,
had a presence in Tajikistan. That is why I'm asking you. I mean, we were
yeah.
helping the Northern Alliance, and
See, what I have to say with sort of some certainty is that I was not connected with them in any way. The independence of a journalist is very important, and at times it becomes the survival card for that journalist. Because if you sort of create the impression at any time that you are linked with an intelligence agency or with a military or a foreign defense ministry, you become a biased party in that conflict, and a party which has a certain operational role. A journalist's safety often depends on his or her being completely and obviously unbiased and unconnected to any official agency, whether in Kashmir, whether in the Northeast. Many journalists who's reported from there will tell you that your impartiality and your non-connectedness with agencies is very important for your survival. So that I made very sure was the case. Anybody who was listening to me from these agencies were doing it just as a viewer and as a person who could very well be just an average citizen.
you're very well said, Ajay, on this count, because during my travel to Kashmir and other places, I realized that all those people who could hurt you also keep track of what you write and what you say, and they keep you away and they keep you safe if they realize you are neutral and they are not biased in any way. So I think what you raised is a very valid point. So
Absolutely.
coming back to your journey as a war correspondent, after that you went to Iraq or you went to Lebanon?
Uh, 2001 was all Afghanistan till the end. 2002 was when the American forces came in and started building up a presence and sort of spread out across the country, established camps as far south as Kandahar and other important places in Afghanistan. And then the United States started that build up towards the Iraq War, where George Bush famously, one of the countries of the axis of evil, and sort of a country that was violating international non-proliferation norms. You will remember, many people have forgotten now
Yeah,
that
shock and awe and WMDs.
there was this whole rationale that was painted that Iraq is building weapons of mass destruction. And the US Secretary of State Colin Powell, who was one of the most respected men in that country, put his reputation on the line and came on and gave an address, famous address, where he sort of put his reputation on the line and said that Iraq is building weapons of mass destruction. Of course, there were no weapons that ever turned up, but the attention of the world and our media's attention then shifted from 2002 to Iraq. And by the beginning of Iraq, I think I got in there just ahead of the Americans on the 9th of April, 2003. And then Iraq was the more attention grabbing and more crucial sector, even as a handful, a reduced number of American forces continued to operate in Afghanistan.
So you went to Iraq. How did you reach Iraq?
To reach Iraq, we had two choices. We could either go via Kuwait up from the border or Jordan. And we chose Jordan because that seemed to be a sort of a less guarded border. It was quite amazing. We just drove across the border. There was no passports or being checked or anything of that kind. The only person who checked a passport was an Iraqi guy with an AK-47 well inside Iraq, who came and stuck the muzzle of his gun into our thing and said, show me your passports. And he started leafing through my passport. And I had this AK-47 pointed at me. And I was wondering what would be sort of something that would make him decide to shoot me. And when he finished, he handed it back to me with a smirk. And I said, what were you looking for? And he said, Israeli visas. And I thanked my stars that I had deliberately not been to Israel and had my passport stamped. Otherwise, he could have shot me as an agent of the Zionist regime, as they call it.
Okay, that's very interesting. And then you reached Baghdad. When was that you reached Baghdad?
We reached Baghdad on the, I think, 8th or 9th of April, just when the American tanks were rolling in. And off we went to the Intercontinental Hotel. By then I had learned that the first thing you need to do is to get a good hotel room where you can put your kit and put your broadcast equipment, and where there's a good chance that you might be getting power supplies from the hotel generator. So we went to the Intercontinental Hotel. And here's an interesting point. That day, NDTV was being launched as a independent channel. Before that, it used to produce the news for Star News. So that was the first broadcast of NDTV, the first bulletin, the first story was us reporting from Baghdad that day, having just arrived over there.
Tell me, did your experience to cover Afghanistan help you cover Iraq? I mean, how did you bring in your experience as in the army, as a very, very young, you can say, war correspondent in Afghanistan, and now you're quite rather soon enough, you're asked to cover Iraq war, which is also a very big event in many ways. It made the fortunes of many war correspondents. So how did you bring in that experience and how did it help you?
Well, that's a very good question. And the fact is that my experience of many months in Afghanistan came in great use to me when we were preparing for the Iraq thing. Remember, like many zones that are the sort of battlefields for a war, the power supply of Baghdad had been completely knocked out. Their water supply was completely knocked out. Fortunately, I had had that experience, and I knew that when we entered Jordan, we entered Amman and from there drove into Baghdad. The first thing that I did was to go out and buy a generator set, a small 2 kVA generator set. And that was our lifeline because there was no power for the entire duration that I stayed in Baghdad that time. Fortunately, we had our own power supply. We had an editor this time, a cameraman this time. So this time I was one of the well-equipped journalists, thanks to NDTV. We learned how to stay away from trouble. We learned what sort of looks like a place where you must be very careful. We learned that a lot of people in war zones like video coverage. And for example, people were looting the banks in Baghdad. And we said, come on, can we come with you for a story on bank looting in Baghdad? They said, yeah, come along. They were very happy, and they were giving sound bites during the course of that attack on the bank. So it's a strange place, a war zone. You just have to be a little sharp, a little aware of your surroundings, a little knowledgeable about what could go wrong, and you most of the time you stay alive, Sanjay.
So did you have any local guide to ensure that you remain safe from trouble, or what was it? I mean, how did you go about, say, for instance, the war has got over, technically speaking, and you go into a place where banks are being looted or people are being hanged or Saddam Hussein's statue being pulled down. So how do you go about it? I mean, is there fear of any kind that you're getting in and you could become a target of sorts? You may be taken as an Israeli or somebody. How do you save
Well,
yourself?
to tell the truth, you don't sort of think too much about things like that, because the fact is there are car bombs, there are improvised explosive devices, and if you are sort of thinking about them, it's very hard to do journalism at the same time. You have to sort of rely on a degree of good luck, combined, of course, with the spatial awareness that you need of the surroundings around you. And sort of if you're careful in that respect, you'll remain safe most of the time. For me, my big worry was always my cameraman, because just as General H.K. Singh said earlier, and I think made the same point. These cameramen are absolute daredevils. They just want to get closer and closer to the action and get a better and better shot. And you can keep trying to pull them out, but they're saying, no, I've got to get one more shot. And that one more shot is a very dangerous business. It could be the last shot you ever take. So my fear was most of the time for my camera person. And as the sort of senior member of a correspondent, cameraman, editor team, that's the way it should be. You're responsible for their safety. And no story is worth dying for. It's because if you die, you're not going to tell the story. So you have to be sure that you're safe, your crew is safe, and that you sort of manage to do your work at the same time.
Ajay, when you did the Iraq story, uh, parallelly you had a group of embedded journalists who were being taken by the US Army. You weren't part of the embedded corps which was there. How was your reporting different from the embedded journalists?
Well, it's almost like comparing somebody who's in jail to somebody who's outside jail. The person outside the jail is going to always tell you a better story, and a story with a wider sort of canvas than the person who's embedded. You have many advantages that come from being embedded, but in my opinion, at least, they are terribly outweighed by the disadvantages that come from the restrictions that the military will impose on you, whether you're embedded with the military or with the police or with government agencies. You are going to have, as they say in Lucknow, pabandiyan imposed on you, and you will perforce have to sort of manage to operate within that. So I felt, and I'm glad that my channel also felt, that it's better to take the risks that come from operating on your own, and to be able to have the freedom that you sort of get from being a lone wolf. And we were able to do stories like, it sounds ridiculous now, but to do an actual uh, poll of Iraqis, the average man on the street, what he thinks of the idea of Indian troops coming into Iraq and taking over a sector. You remember at that stage, America was very keen on a
Pushing, yeah.
division of Indian troops going in over there. So what did we do from NDTV? We prepared a poll and sort of asked people on the streets at random over 3 or 4 cities what they felt about the idea. And this must have been the first poll in Iraq since several thousand years BC, because their rulers, such as Saddam Hussein, certainly did not encourage the sort of expression of opinion and free will. So we got a really good story out of that, because the unquestioned and absolutely unambiguous message that came out from the people of Iraq, and there were more than 1,000 people we polled, was that we don't want India here. We don't want any foreign countries here. This is our country. The Americans should get out as soon as possible. It was the message which became clearer as time went on. But yeah, coming back to the question that you asked, I'm not one who advocates embedded journalism. I think the disadvantages are far too great.
Uh, Now I go to Lebanon. When did you go to Lebanon thereafter?
Lebanon was 2006, the
And
Hezbollah war with Israel, as it's called.
oh, that one. Can you just explain how different it was to cover that war with the Iraq war and subsequent, and before that the Afghan thing? And how long did you stay there?
Lebanon, and you're making a very sort of valid point subliminally, which is that every war zone is different. In Lebanon, I have to say I made the best entry any correspondent could make into a war zone, and that was to sail in on the naval destroyer INS Mumbai. It came in to evacuate Indians who were stuck in Baghdad and sorry, I beg your pardon, in Beirut and in other places. But I can tell you that the shadow of the guns of a destroyer from your own navy, it beats taxis and beats walking any day. So we sailed in style, and the destroyers, we of course got off and started doing our reporting. But the destroyer took out close on 1,000 people, if I remember carefully. And they were people, not just Indians, but Sri Lankans, Bangladeshis, people from all over South Asia. And it was a terrific goodwill job that the Navy did over there by taking out those people. But for me, we went in some style. And then you had the peculiar nature of the war in Lebanon, which is half civil war and half sort of war against the Israelis. And as a consequence of that, West Beirut and East Beirut were completely different. East Beirut was a battle zone, whereas the West Beirut, we could come back in the evening after doing a day of reporting and come and have a wonderful dinner in a great restaurant with a live band playing. So that was the strange dichotomy of Lebanon and Beirut in particular. But we got there, we got cracking, and then of course we availed of the joys of West Beirut until it was time to move further south to the southern border of Lebanon, where the Israelis were operating.
Very interesting. So I'll ask you one last question, which could be a long one, and it kind of carries on the conversation and the point that you've taken about the freedom of the media to report, despite the fact that you come from an army background where I think there's an attempt to control the narrative, they control what gets out, what doesn't get out. And then because it has manifested itself in some of your recent writings also, how you have reported on Ladakh, how it has in a certain way ruffled a lot of people. There's been some kind of debate also that has been can be heard about whether there should be so much of truth coming out because it could lower the confidence, the morale of the people. How do you see it? Because you've been in the army where I think there is a certain reluctance to ensure that everything is known outside, because army has its own dynamics. And then you have journalists who recognizes that, without freedom, you cannot have credible journalism. So how do you kind of explain both the things? You tell us about Ladakh, you tell us about the other things.
Well, Sanjeev, you know as well as I do that establishments, whether it's a Ministry of Defense or a Ministry of Home Affairs or an intelligence agency or the military, establishments don't like information coming out. Left to themselves, they would operate on their own without ever disseminating information to the public. And if they do sort of disseminate, they would want to control that so tightly that sort of nothing that could be even remotely sort of uncomplimentary would come out. And that is the exact opposite of a journalist's job. So institutionally, you are counterposed to the establishment. And that's just the way it is. There's nothing that can be done about it. It's not good or bad or anti-national or national. It's just that your role as a journalist is counterposed to your role as a sort of citizen or as a, even though I'm saying this, even though you're fulfilling one of the sort of prime roles of a democracy, which is the fourth estate. And yeah, I would say that uh, it was good not to be embedded or to be sort of a part of a military sort of establishment. You do have all kinds of inconveniences and dangers that you have to deal with. But and remember, a journalist is a very lonely man in a combat zone. The military, which gets so much credit for being there, hum desh ke rakhwale hain kind of thing, are actually very well protected. They are operating in teams. They've got security of multiple kinds. A journalist has just his pen or his camera, or her pen or her camera in many cases. So I would say that yeah, there are many disadvantages to being embedded or being a part of an establishment, but the advantage that it gives you, which is that it allows you to go anywhere, report anything that you want, whether it's good, bad, complimentary. For us, it doesn't matter whether it's complimentary or not. What matters is it true? Is it important? And if it's true and it's important, it's our job as a journalist to put it out there. I don't think any national interest has ever been sort of misserved, or any nation has ever suffered really critically as a result of a journalist's report. Whereas on the other hand, there have been many cases where that report has contributed to building up of opinions amongst its target audience towards how a thing is perceived. The Vietnam War in the United States' history was eventually ended largely because of unfavorable reporting. So I think that the role that journalists play at that in a war zone does not demand or does not benefit from being embedded. Much better to go out there and tell the story as you see it.
I think very well spoken, Ajay. And you actually anticipated my question. I wanted to ask you whether you've been a soldier, you've been the officer in the army, and you've also been a journalist. So how do the two roles really play out? So you said that journalists are lonely, and I agree with you. I have so many of my friends who were in Afghanistan, and many of them women, who I think driven and attracted by the desire to get into the unknown and report and get to the truth probably took them there. So when all of them were returning, you'd be surprised there were so many women who were there. And same with the list of some of the top journalists, you'll find so many women reporters who managed to use the resources, the resourcefulness, and got truth that the government wanted to avoid. Thanks so much, Ajay, for speaking with us. I
Thank
think
you,
after
Sanjay.
that,
It was a great
we'll
pleasure.
allow General HK Singh to step in and give us a break in between before we go to Abhijit.
Thank you, Sanjay. Ajay, just one point for you. There are two questions. One is from Shakir Jacob and one is from Ashwini Kumar Chanan, whose regiment was also there in Lebanon as a UN peacekeeping force. They are big questions, so we will take them up in the end. Just one more question which has come to me. Somebody wants to know about Afghanistan. They are very lovely people. Just one good anecdote of your Afghanistan experience. They have a great bonhomie. There is a food and this and that. Tell us something good about it. Some tank ride or something like that.
I'll tell you about a tank ride. I went to the front lines, Northern Alliance front lines, to try and ensure that I could build up a relationship with an Afghan commander that would allow me to travel with them as and when they went to capture Kabul. So there I was sitting with this commander, and we were talking about Bollywood, of course, and Amitabh Bachchan. When suddenly three of his tanks drive up. He had 3 tanks total. And I said, wow, you've got 3 tanks. He says, yes, I'm going to win the war with these 3 tanks. So I said, can I drive one of them? So he looked at me like I was crazy. He says, you're a journalist. What do you know about driving a tank? He didn't know that I had just come off 22 years of driving tanks and being a part of a tank regiment. So I walked very casually with my most Amitabh Bachchan like step to the tanks, got in, started up, and did 2 rounds, and then put it off and came back. The entire bunch of people, the Afghans who were there, that commander and his sort of personal staff, they were looking completely, their jaws were hanging open. They said, my God, we hadn't realized that Indians were just, all of them know how to drive tanks. We didn't figure out that this was just a tank experienced Indian. So, sure enough, I became extremely close to those people. And when we actually went into Afghanistan, I went in with them, crossed a couple of minefields, had a little encounter, and that was the way it went. So they really like Indians. On another occasion, I was doing a story on the Kabul stock exchange, the not the stock exchange, the finance, the currency exchange, and we interviewed one person. I was sort of my translator translated, and he appeared to be a bit, angry or upset. So after he finished the interview, my translator turned to him, who translator was also an Afghan, and said, "What kind of an Afghan are you? You're talking to an Indian brother, and this is how you talk. This is the anger that you display." That man's jaw fell open. He said, "Sorry, I thought this was a Pakistan TV channel. Can we do the interview again?" And we did the interview again, and he was absolutely sort of a different man at that stage. He hugged me at the end and said, "Sorry for sort of not recognizing you as an Indian. Indians are our friends."
Okay, thank you so much. Other two questions we'll take up later on.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
what is the relevance of the story of Anthony Mascarenhas, whose great article came out on the 13th of June on the Sunday Times in the 9,047 word center page and heading in 72 typesetting with just one word, genocide, and a great editorial by Evans, Stop Killing. Uh, if you go back and recall what his mother's words were, to stand up always and speak the truth. That is what the journalism is all about, and that is what Anthony Mascarenhas did. He was from Goa. He married a Goan girl, but he worked throughout his life in Karachi till sometime in May 1971. He had a stint in India in 63 to 65. But when he was taken as an embedded journalist by the Pakistanis on 14th of April 1971 to do some image building for their own nation and outside the world because they had taken a great beating, he could not take it on. He said, I must tell the truth. And you can't tell the truth if you're sitting in Pakistan. Through a great exciting story, he and his wife, and they all extricated and finally settled in UK. And they met the Mr. Evans and Mr. Giles. And then the story came about. And thereafter, Western media really took off from USA to very other agencies. So that was a story that you have to speak the truth. We have enough time, and we will request Sanjay to take over and go back almost 50 years. This year is the Golden Jubilee of 1971, and ask Abhijit his experiences.
Thank you so much, General H.K. Singh, for bringing the focus back on Bangladesh. That is how we started this entire panel discussion. The 50 years since Bangladesh got liberated. It was East Pakistan. And if you recall, I have major reservations being, about the Mascarenhas story being the game changer. It was perhaps
Pankaj?
Yeah. The Pak army, how they attacked the campus of Delhi, of Dhaka University, became the watershed. And that was the reason why the Pakistani army decided to get Mascarenas and few more journalists to shore up their image in Pakistan and elsewhere, because I think they were facing enormous pressure in the Pakistani media also about how they were doing. Although there was martial law and there was an attempt to control the narrative, but they were desperately looking for some good words to flow. So out of the 10 odd people who had gone to Pakistan, to Bangladesh or East Pakistan, 7 of them apparently wrote the story. Mascarenas, I think his conscience started troubling and he shared it with his wife. And then he escaped to London and met the editor of Times London, Harold Evans, and that is when he sold the story. But before he sold the story, he managed to extricate his wife and the family from Pakistan, settle them in London, and then he did that big story about the genocide. But Bangladesh, it doesn't is not adequate if it doesn't get reported in Calcutta press. And statesmen, Ananda Bazar Patrika, Amrit Bazar Patrika, all of them have been writing about it regularly, and that is where I think Abhijit Dasgupta, who looks so young to give even suggestion, that he covered the Bangladesh war and he went as one of the youngest journalists in the age of 21. And mind you, when he says he went at the age of 21, he had already 7 years of experience working for the Statesman. He joined immediately after higher secondary. So he was literally straight from the cradle or kindergarten into a newspaper. And that is where he earned his spurs. And that is why he was dispatched to East Pakistan when it began to roil and when the violence start unfolding. He has a lot of experience to show in terms of various theaters of violence, conflict, and wars that he has seen. He made some 20 odd trips to East Pakistan during that time. He used to, in those days, there was no border security force, no fencing, nothing. You could just cross over, go to Jessore or neighboring areas and come back. He has a story to tell. And I'm not going to come in the way of Abhijit to tell us exactly the circumstances in which he entered East Pakistan, how did he report, and what was it like to be reporting the unfolding violence. Abhijit.
Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, I have a sore throat today. See, we are basically communicators, and Ajay said something very interesting. He used the word culture. Now, unless you have something common, you cannot communicate. What came in handy for me was that the culture of both East and West Bengal, the language we speak, are same. In fact, my roots are in Bangladesh, the then East Pakistan, Dhaka, and I can speak the local dialect. So that helped. The news started trickling in, and sort of I got interested in what was happening inside East Pakistan. Because since my birth, I've been hearing stories from my father and my uncles about what happened in Dhaka, this, that, and other. So when, can I use some slides?
Yeah, please do that. Because you are a photojournalist, so it is important that you show your photograph.
On the night of 25th, early morning of 26th of March, Pakistan Army launched Operation Searchlight. And they invaded Jagannath Hall and Liaquat Ali Hall in Dhaka University and killed many educationists, intellectuals, and all that. This was on the 25th of March. I entered Jessore on the 28th of March. The photograph you see here is the first photograph that got published from inside East Pakistan. And you see, these guys are flying the then Bangladesh flag. It is different from what the flag looks like today. It had a map inside, and that's me inside. If you notice this group, you will notice that this guy, for instance, can't even afford a shirt, yet he's wearing a belt. So this was the kind of group that greeted me. And my only arm was that I was carrying medicine. And each fighting army needs medicine, as you know. And I had gone in alone. And therefore, it was easier for me to move around with them, mingle with them, and befriend them. I'll quickly, my time is limited. I'll quickly take you through some slides. This is Rajshahi. You can see the Pakistan flag on top of the water tank. The Pakistan army hadn't crossed the railway line. This side, from where I took the photograph, incidentally, I mostly used a 50mm lens on a Leica camera, though I had a tele lens, but being a hardened follower of Cartier-Bresson, I always preferred the 50mm lens. And they were firing. So as we ducked, we saw bullets whizzing above our heads. Now you can see from here, you have the Joy Bangla flag here, and this is where we were ducking, and you have the Pakistani flag here, and the railway line is somewhere here. So this is the nearest that we could go to the Pakistani front and face bullets. Now I'll come to the brutality part of the Pakistan army. To get information, they even chopped off a leg of a soldier, a Mukti Bahani soldier. And I met this guy at the Rajshahi hospital. They had nothing. They were relying on Dettol and things like that. They had run out of medicine even. Village after village. This was Chingri Khali village in Punla. The whole village was burned, was set on fire, and the whole village was burnt. So we interviewed this guy, Muhammad Kanchan, who saved many Hindus, because this village predominantly was a Hindu village, but the Muslims of the village helped the Hindus to get away from the brutalities of the Pakistan army. The Pakistan army did not spare even the village masjid. This is the masjid, you can see. It has been brutalized. And mandir, even the idol had been taken out. They were looking for some hidden wealth underneath, possibly. The mandir and the masjid both were ransacked. I'll tell you something. In 1970, I used to participate regularly in motor rallies, and I participated in the Asian Highway Motor Rally from Tehran to Dhaka. And there I made many friends. I thought of bringing out a booklet, a thin booklet that I would smuggle to West Pakistan. So I brought out this booklet, Exodus 1971 AD, showing the plight of the refugees. We used to send 20 booklets to Colombo, where we had a friend, and then send it across to Karachi and Rawalpindi, where they would be left behind in petrol pumps, libraries, post offices, just for people to pick up and see. Many people wrote about it, Shotu Utrai, Mrinal Sen, Buddhadev Guha, Ramapada Chaudhary, and this is Deepak Bandyopadhyay. Deepak wrote for me. Deepak had gone in with me to one of my Rajshahi trips and never came back. That's a long story. We got lost in an Adhi, a sandstorm, and then we could manage to come back, but he couldn't. And Senator Kennedy comes to see the refugees, and we went to the border, and we saw the refugees trickling in. These were, I saw similar photographs, not one, two, but in hundreds. Dead bodies been taken in ox carts. And then I became a war correspondent, and the picture behind is what I found at the Jagannath Hall when I went in. Incidentally, I was the first to cover the Seva smashes when Indian Air Force took on the sabers of the Pakistan Air Force, and I met them, and we recorded a long interview. If I had time, I would have said how the fight took place, a dog fight took place. But we don't
have time. You have time. We want to know.
Okay. So I'll quickly read this. Sores, my number 2, saw them first. There were 3, 4 miles away, coming head on. We made contact at about 2,500 feet. The number 1 came straight at me, and he and I got into a dogfight. I knew that my 2 and 3 were watching my tail. You have to fight your own battle. You have got to get the other fellow to fight the way you want him to. That's the important thing. We got lower and lower, and finally I got him at 500 feet. It was all over in not more than a minute. 60 seconds, a brief burst from the Nat's twin 30mm guns, and Flight Lieutenant Massey had achieved the ultimate ambition of a fighter pilot. So I met all 3 of them. And I also met Kumud Bondhu Bakshi, who was then the controller who first located the Pakistan Air Force sabers coming in. So I have some 100 photographs of them as I spent quite a few days with them. In fact, at an Air Force, at an airstrip, which I'm not supposed to. At least I don't know if I can now, but at that point of time, I was not supposed to mention which airstrip. Talking about embedded, or when you go in the army, you know, when I went in with myself, I could see many things that the army couldn't perhaps show. But when I went in with the army, you see what you are supposed to see. You saw the army, you know, searching for bodies and landmines. This was somewhere near Khulna. I want to make one thing clear. I did not go from the Agartala side ever. My entries were essentially to Jasor, Khulna, Nator, Pabna, and all that area. And this is, when you go with the army, you get this kind of photographs. You know, army in action, convoys, and you know, dilapidated Pakistani vehicles and tanks lying around and all that. There were some shells, incidentally, not these, but there were shells which the army then recovered, which were still live. So immediately, I think 6-7 days after the liberation of Bangladesh, I got an opportunity to go to Dhaka. And the first thing I did was to create a source. You know, every journalist needs a source to get inside. And I met Kamal Bhai. And Kamal, no one could be greater than Kamal Bhai. As you know, he was the eldest son of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And he was then the ADC to the army commander. We became great friends, and he took me around. I met very interesting persons. I met Samina, the lady here. Now, if you read this, it says, you know, I went to Rukaya Hall in Sabis Rickshaw. A bullet grazed his hand, but he is alive to see a free Bangladesh. You can see the bullet had grazed his hand here. Samina got involved with the guerrillas when my brother and his friends joined the Mukti Bahini and wanted to hide their arms in our house. I started helping them by carrying arms to the camp. I took part in one action at Baitul Mukarram, a shopping center in New Dhaka, around the 20th day of Ramadan. We hijacked a car, filled it up with explosives, and parked it near some shop where 5-pack army men were buying some fruits. The explosion killed all of them. To cover our escape, my commander and I lobbed 2 grenades at other soldiers who rushed to rescue their comrades. I met the lady, simple girl, but with fantastic resolution. She had the resolve to do anything. I also met this very unique character called Lieutenant Shafiq, and he insists he has only one name, Lieutenant Shafiq. He's a Pak army officer who escaped, and then the Indian army took him to Dhaka, and his first job was to train the guerrillas to loot banks. So he used to train the Bahini, the Mukti Bahini, to loot banks. At one of the meetings, this lady suddenly, for the first time, sang Shonar Bangla, which is now the national anthem of Bangladesh. Now, this is interesting, is when the first Razakas were publicly brought and displayed. Nawab Wali, chairman of the East Peace Committee, and Muhammad Ali, Razakar commander, they were brought in the main road. And Muhammad Abdul Rashid, this young chap, we sabotaged electrical networks, destroyed pylons, and killed Razakars and collaborators. In Badi Badi village in the Jaidepur Thana area, I killed a collaborator, Moinuddin Sharkar. He was about 30, was married, and had a daughter. We surrounded his house one afternoon and broke in. Seeing us, his mother put up arms around her son to protect him. Both were on the bed. She had covered him with her body. I pushed my rifle under the man and shot him twice or thrice. He was killed. The mother was also hurt. Now, when you talk to these guys, they don't show any sentiments. They don't show any that, on a cold-blooded you kill. Such was the state of suffering that, you reach a point when you don't get into any emotions whatsoever for killing a person. And then I had this great opportunity of meeting the then Prime Minister, Janab Tajuddin Ahmed, 7 o'clock in the morning, and had Luchi with him as breakfast, his wife, the 3 daughters and son. I met the whole family. In fact, I stayed with them for one full day. This, of course, courtesy Kamal Bhai, that he took me to my ancestral house in Wari. And this is for the first time I saw our house, because when we left, I was very young. This is an interesting photograph. You see Kamal Bhai with Begum Mujib. This is in their house. But what is interesting is the brothers. They are no more. Sheikh Jamal, Sheikh Russell. And again, this is something very interesting. Not very many people, even Bangladeshis, haven't seen it. Is the condition of Sheikh Mujib's house. I was among the first to get inside and take a photograph of the house. I'll read this. The house looks as if a tornado has hit it. It bears signs of vandalism by men gone berserk. All glass panes are broken, walls pockmarked with bullet holes, smashed furniture, picture torn to shreds scattered on the floor, electrical fittings ripped out, bathroom pipes are wrenched out of the walls, taps missing. And that's Sheikh Sahib's office. This is how I found out. This is a picture of Sheikh Sahib torn. Someone tore it apart. There are photographs of letters that he had written. They were all scattered around in the floor. I had copied many of the letters. And then I met the family. On the left, you see Sheikh Hasina. She was a young lady then. Of course, she's the Prime Minister now. Okay, so so much so for my presentation. It's not possible for me to show all the slides because it would take me hours and hours and hours. So basically, I thought I'll just take you through and give you a glimpse of what I went through. I've faced bullets and I've seen the warmth. I've shared their lunch. I rode in their vehicle with them, and I rode with them, and I rode without them in military jeeps also. So that's basically it.
What was happening in Bangladesh is a major civilizational conflict. I mean, you had Pakistan army, which was trying to Islamize the country, and you had the Bengali nationalism, which was secular, which was trying to assert itself. And that is what in a certain way triumphed at the end of it, because you had the forces of religious fundamentalism that kind of got defeated against by Bengali nationalism. But you went subsequently after the Pakistan army surrendered. Can you describe how Dhaka was after that?
Dhaka was euphoric, absolutely. People were out there in the streets cheering anyone. When I went in a Dakota, there was a huge crater right at the center of the runway. So nothing bigger than a Dakota could land. And after getting down from the aircraft, we walked down, they took pictures of the crater. And then, we saw all that. But the point I'm trying to make is that anywhere I went in, I was greeted with open arms. And perhaps more because I went with Kamal Bhai, but even then, I'll just tell you a story. When we went to our ancestral house, the owners came out and said, when I told them that this house belonged to us, they said, please come inside and see. Please come inside and see. It's your house. See it. Feel free. So I received that kind of treatment. And I still have friends in Dhaka who are a part of my extended family.
So after Bangladesh, did you get a chance to cover any other conflict?
No. The only conflict I covered, was Bangladesh. But I have covered something else, but that's a different thing. That's not war.
I mean, you did plenty. You set up television stations. You did move to television in a really big way. I saw your CV to make anybody proud. And
television came in later on. Actually, before television, I did 2 assignments which sort of brought me into limelight. One was the Naga Headhunters, with the Royal Geographic published, with article by Desmond Doyle, photographs by me. And then one was the Onge tribes of Little Andaman. So where I had to go alone, all alone, stayed with them for 7 days. So, but those were not wars, as you know.
So tell me, I mean, you were taking photographs for the Statesman, and you also said that you got the freedom to work for the famous photo agency Gamma. Were your photographs being utilized entirely in Statesman? How were they being displayed? Was it the main story, or you were writing also for them?
No. You see, I joined Statesman in 1963 as a photographer. I was a trainee. So we used to work 4 hours in the day, 4 hours in the night, with colleges in between. And I used to fly. I used to go to early morning. I would go to the flying club and all that. But, my boss was Desmond Doyle, and he hadn't started the Junior Statesman then. So I had the best of guidance. I would say I had the best of guidance, the best of mentoring, and the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do. And therefore, it was he who suggested that I start sending photographs to Gamma. And then I got empaneled with Gamma. And I'll tell you how we used to do. If 2 or 3 of us go into Bangladesh and one came back, he would carry all the cassettes of the 3 of us and give them back to the respective newspapers. Or in my case, Gamma had given me a card by which I could approach the pilot of the first available flight going to Paris. And I would request him to carry the cassettes, and he would carry the cassettes, and Gamma would correct from there. So what happened was, I used to take photographs black and white for Statesman and color for Gamma. So all my color photographs, which are color slides, went to Gamma. The black and white photographs stayed with the Statesman, and those that never got published from the Statesman were later on published by Jugantor, Amritavaja Putrika, whatever, even Times of India, they published. The first preference went to Statesman.
Thank you. Any question you want to ask, General H.K. Singh?
Yeah, there are 2 questions. but
because we have exceeded 70 minutes.
Ajay, are you back?
I can call him up.
Yeah. If he can come in, then we'll ask a question. And meanwhile, I'll share with everybody, as we talk today, a film on Sheikh Mujibur Rahman is currently being shot. The shoot is on in Dhaka. It is going to be a very interesting film because it is being made by very seasoned people. Even Lucknow has some contribution towards it. And I'll be thanking later on. If Ajay comes back, we'll have one or two questions.
I think Ajay is there.
Yeah, he's come.
Okay.
He's here. Yeah, please.
Ajay, these questions are directed by you, directed to you from Ashwini Chanan.
Yeah. Can you read it out for the benefit of everybody who's not wearing glasses?
I'll just read out. We have had Hollywood depictions like A Private War, where Rosamund Pike represented the late war correspondent Mary Colvin, that brought the grim reality of conflict to the common man. We heard you this evening as the next best alternative. What more can be done to bring stories that have gone cold? This is one question. And second question is on the other side, asked by Shakir Jacob, is slightly hatke. Brief causes of the washed up withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan. So first question, definitely. Second question at your choice.
What was the first question once again, very briefly?
Yeah. One second. It's how to bring the cold stories back.
Okay, that's a sort of very good question. And my personal opinion in this respect is that a lot of the reasons why stories grow cold in the first place is because as media houses and so on, we do not have enough correspondents and enough news people chasing that story and keeping it alive. Like Afghanistan, for example, by 2002, March, April, most Indian journalists had come back and there was nobody there to cover the story. So that's why the need of sort of resurrecting a story in the first place comes about. You should not have to resurrect the story. India aspires to be a regional power, the least we can do is to put a correspondent into each one of the regional capitals. But a newspaper like Times of India, which sort of makes a profit of 500 crores or more every year, uh, does not pay for a correspondent in Islamabad, in Dhaka, in Colombo, in Kathmandu. And if we don't have correspondents here, we are A, missing out on a large number of very important stories, and B, having this phenomenon of stories growing cold. So, it's just a question of putting enough resources into news gathering. And in that, we have been, as a media, both print, internet, and visual, I think we have failed as a country, as a sort of national media thing. People, if they want to hear something of what's going on in Nepal, have to turn to BBC because our own correspondents are just not there. So that's one sort of question that I would answer. The other question is, why did they botch up their withdrawal, the Americans? For the simple reason that they don't seem to have grasped the nature of the Afghan people, the Afghan insurgents, and so on and so forth. They tend to, and this is a sort of works across the entire Western world. A lot of impression, a lot of opinion is based on statistical surveys. and statistics. So if you have a statistic that says the Taliban is there in 25 districts of Afghanistan, then they will just reduce the calculation of whether to stay or leave to that figure of 25. How does it compare? It's 1/4 the number of districts in Afghanistan. That means 3/4 of Afghanistan is held out against the Taliban. That means that they will require 6 months to recapture it. These statistical analysis often doesn't work. You need to have an understanding of how the Taliban fights. You need to have an understanding of the Taliban's tendency to prefer negotiation to fighting, which reduces what would otherwise be a battle of 5 days to a 10-minute negotiation and payoff. So the Americans never understood that, and therefore they never understood that the Taliban would very quickly sweep across Afghanistan, even though we had the experience of 1996 to guide us, where again the same thing happened. The Taliban took over very, very fast, much faster than what was expected. So I would say that it's partly cultural understanding, partly confirmation bias that exists in the planners' minds. That's why they got it so wrong, and the Americans were in such trouble.
Can I come in here, Jalan Singh?
There is one more question.
Jalan Singh, I was just come in on why the American.
Okay, yeah.
I have a different view on this, because after the Doha Agreement, which was signed between the US and Taliban, I think by and large the departure had been choreographed to the last detail. And I was in touch with many foreign, you can say, embassies in Kabul and other places, and they were saying that it's the Americans who were actually in control of the entire movement right till 15th of August. And if you look at even from 2014 onwards, there were no American casualty. I mean, in all, in 20 years, you had 2,500 US troops who died. And from 2014 right up to 2021, you had no American soldier who died, save for the time when you had a blast at the port in Kabul airport. So in a certain way, there was deep understanding between Taliban and the Americans, and the departure, when it took place, took everybody by surprise, but it happened because they were on the same page on that. That's my view.
Well, thank you so much. It's a very interesting question. Good points came out. Scotland Leader Chinna from the USI has a question, which is open to all three of you. Truth is the first casualty of war. Would the panel like to comment on the efficacy of Indian media ecosystem in the war? Anyone?
Ajay, please, you speak, then I will also come in at some stage.
Okay, my opinion is that this is not necessarily a valid observation that truth is the first casualty of any war. It is true of reporting in general. If one takes the easy line, if one takes an easy approach, if one is working without adequate wherewithal, if one is not benefiting from good editorial support from the home organization, in that case, you will find that truth becomes the first casualty. But if you're doing all these things properly, if you're following your reporting norms, if you're ensuring that the correspondent is on the site with the wherewithal to get the news, truth does not have to be the first casualty. I'm not getting into the question of whether it is or it isn't, because we have examples of good reporting as well as bad reporting. But I would say it's not just in combat that truth is the first casualty. It is in many different kinds of reporting where adequate oversight and control is not maintained.
Abhijit?
Ajay is right. I'll add something to it. One is, Ajay, you worked for NDTV, and you know my relationship with Prannoy. and we all know what he likes and what he dislikes. The point is, your days are no more. Now it's a day of drama. Sensation sells. So unless you report something that's sensational, that report will not sell. And therefore, your boss would want you to act. Whether you do a drama, whether you report right, wrong, irrelevant, doesn't matter. You have to create a drama. That's the unfortunate truth. It is not just war, it is happening everywhere, in every field. So, as I said, I belong to the old school. I'm too old to be commenting on what is happening today. But my students are there heading many channels, and I tell them whenever I talk to them that what you are doing is perhaps wrong. You should not depend entirely on the 4S. There's something more than the 4S. And another thing is that we don't maintain any archives. We in India, we don't know how to maintain history. Even for Bangladesh, the whole I was asked to go to Fort William a month ago, where I met the general who wanted to talk to me and all that. When he saw the photographs, he says, "How come we don't have these photographs and you have it?" So I said, "I don't know." How come? He says, "How come you have the photographs of the Indian Air Force and we don't have it?" I said, "I don't know, but if you wanted to take the photographs."
Wow.
So my view on this is that in an environment where I think narrative is far more important than facts, truth becomes a casualty. But you have people who display courage. I mean, I keep mentioning that against all kinds of pressures, even Ajay stood his ground, reported on happenings in Ladakh, which went contrary to the dominant narrative. He got a lot of flack on that. But these are very rare instances, because time and again, we have far many situations, not just in India, but everywhere in the world, where, the history that is reported or the facts which are reported in a war situation are black and white, where the truth actually resides in that big gray which is there. And this doesn't really change. I mean, when the truth comes out, then what happens is what we saw in the fight between Azerbaijan and Armenia, when they recognized that so much of land had been lost to Azerbaijan. The Armenians were out on the street demanding aggressively that the leader should be changed. And lo and behold, it happened. So I think people have learned, I mean, the leaders have learned that there is great merit in keeping facts absolutely buried deep inside, so that people do not know how much land has been lost. It can work, it can apply on us, it can apply on others. But that is how I think truth becomes a casualty. And because we have no sense of history, don't even visit what went wrong in 1999 Kargil war, which is also something that required deeper engagement than what it has happened. Or in 1962 China war, we haven't even released the Henderson report till now. So there are many multiple issues.
We would be heading towards the closure. There are some more questions. We will not take them on, but I will just read out. One question is about the journalist leaving the digital footprints when they're in the battlefield in today's scenario. And there was a debate which went on yesterday about the new mobile reporting, which has its own dimensions. But we will not take them on. I'll request Sanjay to kindly sum up today's session, and then I will say a few words of thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for being part of this very interesting discussion. I think presence of Ajay and Abhijit was a big plus in our understanding of how wars have been covered and how they should be covered. Although there is a great need that the culture of war correspondence should grow, there should be more, I think, media schools which should engage with people who have seen or reported on war, so that people can really look the authorities in the eye and report facts. But anyways, it was been a great eye opener. It was good to listen to Ajay and Abhijit sharing their experience. And thanks a lot, General H.K. Singh, for coming up with this great idea of having a literary festival, that too from the most peaceful city in the country, Lucknow, and happy to be part of it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, all of you. The first war correspondent course, if I'm not wrong, in India was started sometime in 1972-73, including one at Jodhpur. Today, through your simple ways, all three of you have won everybody's heart. It has been the most enriching discussion. So thank you very much to Sanjay, Ajai Shukla, and Abhijit. All three, I mean, it was just an amazing session. We are also going to benefit in an indirect way because on 22nd November, we have a session, live session on Dastan Goi, where we'll be depicting the 1971 war live in the true Lucknow tradition. And whatever has been talked about today by Abhijit, we will be making use of it. It was a just war, 1971. And how much just is in the Afghanistan side, I do not know. With that, thank you so much from everybody's side. And thank you from the side of the Military Literature and Cultural Festival Foundation and our mentor, Karun Sharad Avasthi. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, General.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, General.